Hi, everyone. Welcome to the season 1 finale episode of Crime Family. So this week will be a 2-part episode, and we'll be discussing one of the most bizarre and mysterious unsolved murder cases in America. With very few answers and countless questions about the events surrounding this crime and who is responsible for it, there is plenty to discuss. This is the JonBenet Ramsey case. Thank you for joining us. All right, so we're very happy to have you with us. And for this special 2-part episode, we do have a very special guest with us. We have Jennifer Knowles joining us. Jennifer, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I am good. Jennifer, for those of you who don't know, is a close friend of mine. I was actually thinking, I feel like our friendship is probably about as old as this unsolved murder case. So it goes back like nearly over 20 years. So
yeah, pretty much is at this point.
Yeah. So we just thought it'd be fun to have an extra voice on the podcast to give another opinion, other insight. So we've all watched different documentaries. We've all read different articles and stuff. So we're excited to kind of hear what everyone thinks about the case. So kind of similar to what I did in the 2-part Adnan Syed episode. Because it's such a well-known case, I'm not going to spend a ton of time going into every last detail of like the exact timeline, but I'm just going to give like a general overview of the case to start, just to give you the major events that happened and like what case entails, just so that if you aren't super familiar with it, you can still follow along with the discussion, or if you just are familiar with it, you just need a refresher. And I'll just talk about like the main players involved so that the people we're talking about, you know, like who they are. So I'm just going to start maybe like 5-10 minutes just to do just this general overview. But I guess I want to ask, like, what do you guys, how familiar are you with the case? Like before we decided that we were going to discuss it, like, did you know a lot about it beforehand, or is it kind of like newer for you guys?
Yeah, I definitely knew about it beforehand, but before we decided to do it, I didn't go in depth into detail. I probably watched like a documentary here and there, but now I definitely feel like I'm up to speed on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I know a lot about it too, but I first heard it like a while back, and I just kept getting more interested in it, so I kept watching stuff and reading stuff about it. But recently I've been watching the newer documentaries and the newer stuff that's been out around it. I mean, it's the same information, but just different people talking about it. So I'm pretty much caught up on like all the details and stuff like that. So I'm interested to talk about the case.
Yeah, I knew a little bits about it here and there, but I wasn't really in depth with the detail of it. But definitely since we were discussing this, I've like went down a rabbit hole through looking at theories on Reddit and watching all the documentaries and stuff. So I'm definitely more up to speed about it than I was before.
So I'm actually going to just talk about the family itself. So there were 4 people in the immediate family. So of course there was JonBenet Ramsey. She was a 6-year-old girl. And the family lived in Boulder, Colorado at the time that all of this happened in December of 1996. JonBenet's mother, her name was Patricia Patsy Ramsey, and she was actually a former beauty queen who was in the pageant circuit for a lot of her like upbringing and into her adult life. This was something that she passed on to JonBenet because JonBenet herself was heavily involved in the child beauty pageant scene as well. So JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, actually had a couple of children from a previous marriage, and one of his daughters actually tragically died in 1992 in a deadly car accident. So there were some like step siblings involved in the family, but they weren't obviously a part of the major core of the family that is involved in this case. And then the fourth member of the immediate family was Burke Ramsey, and he was JonBenet's 9-year-old brother at the time that this happened. So it all begins on Christmas Day of 1996. So this was later on in the day. The Ramsey family had actually gone over to a friend's house for dinner and then returned back to their own home later that evening. Reports say that JonBenet was asleep upon their arrival back home, so John and Patsy put her to bed, not knowing that it was going to be the last time that they would see her alive. Or was it? I don't know. That's up for debate. So around 5:30 a.m. on December 26th, Patsy got up to make coffee and came across a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note near the bottom of a spiral staircase that was leading to the kitchen. So obviously after reading this note, she was horrified. She rushed to JonBenet's bedroom and was horrified to realize that JonBenet was missing. So of course, it's like her worst nightmare. This is something you would, you see in movies or on TV, this ransom notes, there's a kidnapping. It's a kind of her mother's worst nightmare. So at 5:52 a.m., Patsy makes a frantic 911 call. And we're actually going to play that 911 call for you now, just so that you can be familiar with it, because it's pretty important in the overall case. So we're going to play that for you now.
Police! What's going on? 15th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left and our daughter's gone. A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter? 6 years old. She's blonde. 6 years old. How long ago was this? I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's gone. Does it say who took her? What? Does it say who took her? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says SBTC. Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please. I'm sending an officer over, okay? Please. Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got out and she's right here. Oh my God, please. Okay. Please, there's somebody. I am, honey. Please. Take a deep breath. Please, okay? Hurry. Patsy.
So immediately after that 911 call at approximately 5:54 a.m., Patsy actually calls some family friends to inform them of what is going on as well, and she invites them over to the house, which is kind of weird that would be like her next move would be to call the family friends. So the police officially arrive on the scene at approximately 5:59 a.m. that morning. The police are obviously they're doing the initial investigation, and then a little after 6 a.m. is when all of the friends come over to the house, and they're trying to comfort Patsy and John, and just trying to figure out what's going on. So there's a lot of people going in and out of that house during this time, and of course the first detectives are there at this time as well. And there are some reports that say that John was making some plans to pay the ransom that was in the note. And then later in the day, there was Detective Linda Arndt, and she's one of the main detectives on this day. And she asked if John and Fleet White, who was one of the family friends that was there, would just look around the house to see if anything seemed amiss. And according to Detective Arndt's account, she said that right after she said this, John sort of made a beeline for the basement. So he and his friend Fleet go down into the basement, and they end up coming upon a closed door in one section of the basement. And the detectives had actually earlier that morning, when they first got there, when they were checking the house, they did come across this door, but they were more looking for signs of forced entry, and they could see that the door was clearly latched shut, so it wasn't really of any interest to them. So when John and his friend go down, they do open up this closed door. When they go in there, sure enough, they do find the body of 6-year-old JonBenet on the ground inside that room, and her torso was covered with a white blanket. So John picked her up and immediately brought her upstairs, and this immediately disrupts critical evidence, tampers with the crime scene. Obviously you shouldn't be touching anything or disrupting like the very critical evidence that could be there. And he laid her down on the floor in one of the main rooms, and then actually Detective Arndt actually picks her up again and moves her to another room, and then John puts a blanket over her in that room. So there's a lot of tampering with the body and stuff like that. So she was found with duct tape over her mouth. Her hands were bound together and up over her head. And there was a homemade garrote tied around her neck. So for those of you who don't know what a garrote is, it's like a fancy way of like an instrument used for strangulation. You tie the wooden thing around it and then you twist it. And as you twist it, the more you twist it, the tighter it gets and eventually suffocates the person. So it was a homemade garrote that was found around her neck at the time. And so when they did, obviously, an autopsy of the body, they did find that there was about an 8.5-inch skull fracture in JonBenet's head as well. And they also found these two, I don't want to say abrasions, but two marks on her side of her back that said they looked similar to something that would be like a taser or something of that nature. They found that on the body as well. And they did say that there was no, and I feel like there's different accounts. There are some reports that say that they did conclude that there was a sexual assault that happened, but then there was others that said there was no definitive, they say it couldn't be ruled out, but it also couldn't be definitively said. And there was an interview from the detective Linda Arndt that she did in 1999, so it's still quite a while ago. But she's talking about how the evidence showed, or in her experience, that there was evidence to show that that there was a sexual assault and that it wasn't the first sexual assault. So kind of implying that she had been previously sexually assaulted before the actual murder had happened, like before the day of. So take that for what it's worth. I don't know if she's redacted that statement since, but it was from 1999. So, so of course this case blew up and became like a whole sensation. Everyone was, it happened in Boulder, Colorado, and there was, everyone in Boulder was very worried if there was like this predator that was, in the neighborhood who was, possibly a sex offender who was going around, going to be breaking into homes. So there was no forced entry into the home, except there was a broken window in the basement. And this was a window that had actually broken prior. John said he had broken it. He had gotten locked out of the house, so he had to break that window to get into the house or something, and they just had never gotten around to actually fixing it. So there was that broken window. But other than that, there was no other sign of forced entry, and there's only 4 people who were known to be inside that house on the night of the murder, which would have been the 4 people in the immediate family. And initially, the family was cooperative. They did agree to give blood samples and handwriting samples, as well as hair samples. So in the initial first few days and weeks, they were cooperative, but then as the months go on, they are becoming less and less cooperative. They are getting lawyers, and they're trying to, tell their friends and family members to not speak to the media, not go to the police, not say anything. So that's a lot of it is kind of surrounding this sort of suspicion as well as to why they're not being as cooperative as maybe they could have been. Like what changed in like the first couple of weeks to the months after, when they started to not meet with the police as much or kind of be avoidant. They did go on some, they did do a CNN interview, like a 45-minute CNN interview where they're talking about that there's someone out there on the loose to like protect your children, stuff like that. So there was a lot of suspicion surrounding the parents, specifically in the first few weeks of the initial investigation. And I've obviously up until now, it's 25 years later, and it's still kind of suspicious. There was actually in 1999, there was actually a grand jury that did vote to indict John and Patricia Ramsey for the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. However, the district attorney decided not to move forward with those charges, and so they were never actually charged. But when he came up, he did give a press conference at the time saying that there was not sufficient evidence to press charges, but he kind of withheld the information or the fact that a grand jury had voted to indict. So they did like the initial trial with the grand jury, and they came to that conclusion, but he didn't share that information. He just said that there was not enough evidence to actually press charges. So he kind of put the kibosh on that, and there were no official charges laid. And as of today, it's still unsolved. We don't know exactly who committed this murder, and there's multiple theories happening. If it was someone in the home, if it was someone in the family, if it was an intruder that came in like through that broken window, lots of stuff. So obviously that's like very bare bones sort of description of the case. And we're going to go into like the key pieces of evidence that are involved in the case into more detail. But do you guys have any like initial additions you want to make or thoughts before we get into the other stuff?
I actually just wanted to describe like a grand jury was, because when I was like, what is actually a grand jury and what's like their significance? Like, so would you guys even know how to like explain what a grand jury is and why they're important?
I couldn't articulate it correctly or officially.
Okay.
So you could, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just going to describe what a grand jury is, just so like you understand like kind of the importance, especially in this case. So I'm just going to read most of this like word for word from this article from the Denver Post online, and it's written by Mary George. And this article is actually like about the Ramsey grand jury. So in general, a grand jury is a group of citizens that works with a prosecutor to investigate crimes and attempt to establish probable cause for trial. So it's like preliminary before a trial even starts. And the grand jury has powers that police and district attorneys do not. So they can subpoena reluctant witnesses or people that refuse to talk initially to investigators. So this grand jury could subpoena John and Patsy Ramsey if they felt the need to, which is interesting. A grand jury like also lets a prosecutor know how strong the case is. It's kind of like a trial run before an actual trial to see how the grand jury reacts, is maybe how an actual jury trial would go. So it's kind of like insight for the prosecutor. And so in this case, when they did want to indict, it's like the grand jury saying, yes, like there's enough evidence. We feel like this is definitely worth going to court. But then the prosecutor, who is Alex Hunter in this case, went against that, which is interesting to note. So yeah, that's what a grand jury is.
Yeah, and so I think the fact that a grand jury voted to indict them is very telling, obviously, of the amount of evidence that there would have had to have been or that they felt was strong enough to actually vote to indict them. So it's kind of telling to show you how confident they were in that. But I find it weird. So a grand jury, it's made up of like regular people, right? That like a normal jury would be, right? It's just like people that they select from a pool and...
Yes, citizens,
like, so,
yeah.
Citizens,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like
okay.
that probably get called to jury duty.
But I think like that information that they were actually indicted came out later. Like no one really knew that had happened until much later on, because all they knew was that the district attorney had made that press conference. Because in the documentary that I watched, it said that he kind of like was misleading in the information that he gave, because he did say that like there was not enough sufficient evidence to go forward with it, but that was like his decision. Whereas the grand jury actually felt that there was and voted to indict, but he kind of overrides it. That's the impression I got, which I didn't think is possible. If a grand jury has that much power, I can't see that a district attorney would be able to like shoot it down. But
yeah, I think they're just there to give insight and like, this is what we think you should do, but they don't have to listen to it. But I feel like normally they do. That's the whole point of a grand jury. Yeah, so I do have this in my notes somewhere about how long after this actually came out, because the way he talked about it in the press conference was, yeah, like he was saying that it almost sounded like the grand jury feels like we shouldn't go ahead with an indictment. That's what everybody thought. Yeah, so according to the documentary from CBS called The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, it didn't get released that the grand jury had actually wanted to indict until October of 2015. So that's kind of crazy.
Like almost 20 years after that crime. But 16 years after.
It would have been like, what, like...
Because the crime happened in 96, so that would have been almost 20 years, but the indictment would have happened in 99, I think. Grand jury.
Yeah, he made the announcement that they weren't going to indict in 1999, and then it came out later that they actually wanted to indict in 2015.
Yeah, which is crazy. So I guess that's kind of a lesson to show you that you have to have DAs that aren't corrupt, because maybe he had other political motivations for why he didn't want to press charges or something. Who knows? And also, I don't know, I'm just, like, the Ramseys were very well off, so who knows like what lawyer they had or
No, actually, that you that you say that it was political, because when like there was like a team of detectives and there was FBI agents and there was personnel from the DA's office, they all got together and suggested that they needed a grand jury. And the DA, who was Alex Hunter at the time, was like, oh, I gotta think about this. I gotta talk to some people, because this is actually a political decision rather than, there was a murdered girl kind of decision. So that's kind of where his head was at the whole time, was that it was political.
Yeah, which is so annoying, because it shouldn't be. It should just be like there's a 6-year-old who was murdered, and if that there's enough evidence to suggest who could have done it. Like, how's that a political thing? But whatever. It's politics, I guess. But yes, vote for good DAs. I'm going to go to the ransom note, which is, like, to me, the most bizarre, fascinating. Like, to me, that's what makes the case so crazy and, like, stands out from so many other cases, is, like, very rarely do you have, like, a ransom note, especially one that's 2.5 pages long and as in depth, and also just super fucking, like, weird. Just, like, the way it's written and stuff in it. So I'm going to read the ransom note out, and just so that everyone who's listening can, like, be fresh with exactly what it says, and then we're going to go into, like, the specific details of, like, maybe evidence they found surrounding that, and, like, the super weird things that are connected with that. So I'm just going to read that now. Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed. And if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate sized attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence an earlier pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny, as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory. SBTC. So, what do you guys think of that? There's, like, so much to, like, talk about. I just want
to say that nobody writes a 2.5 page ransom note. No, aren't ransom notes usually, like, a couple sentences? Like, give me this amount of money and then you get your child back or whoever?
Yeah, well, in the documentary, like, the CBS documentary, The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, they do mention, like, I think at one point they say about 76% of the ransom note is filler and is not necessary. They say that it could have been done in, like, 4 lines. Like, we have your daughter, give us this amount of money, put it in a brown paper bag, we'll call you tomorrow. Done. Like, all that other stuff is, like, so unnecessary. And also just a bit of information as well. So during the investigation, they did find out that the letter was actually written inside the home, which is also super crazy. So the ransom note was written on a piece of paper from a pad that was in the home, as well as a marker that was in the home as well. And they actually found in the trash, like, some crumpled up pieces of paper that were from a practice version of the note. So it's as if somebody, like, wrote out a couple of tries and tried to get it right, and then wrote the actual letter. So my question is, what kind of person who's going to break into a house is going to take the time to sit down and write a letter that's 3 pages long, and then also write practice versions of that letter? Like, isn't time of the essence if you're breaking into someone's house? Like,
also in the documentary, they did, like, a practice to see how long it would take them to write the note, and it took them over 20 minutes to get that note out. And that was, like, them knowing what to write and just sitting there copying it, rather than, like, you know, trying to think of it as they went. So that would have taken even longer. And like you said, someone to write out a practice would even take even longer. I think it's important to note that they said that was Patsy's notepad because her fingerprints were all over it. And it was found at her writing desk. So it wasn't like they just brought that in, like maybe the kidnappers brought it in, wrote it, and left it there. Like, her fingerprints were all over it. So it was her notepad, which is super sus.
But I don't understand. Why wouldn't you have a ransom note written in advance? Like, to me, that's so weird. Like, aren't you just gonna go in there, like, take her, leave the note? You're just gonna, like, sit there casually in the kitchen writing this note out. Like, to me, that just seems so bizarre. And I can't even think of, like, any, like, person, even if they are quite stupid, who's gonna do that.
Well, even in a situation like that, like, if they were to write the ransom note on the spot, it would be much more frantic. It would be much more messy. And again, it would only be like 4 or 5 lines and you'd be done.
Like, what was the point of all of that? Like, what was the point of that 3-page thing? Like I said, you could write it in 4 lines. Like,
yeah, like, get in, get out. That'd be my mentality. Like, get the fuck out of here as soon as I can. Like, don't sit there and chill for a little bit and think about what I'm going to write and practice it. Like, you know, yeah, like, bring the note with you, or, yeah, this is what I have to do, and then get out.
They also mentioned in that documentary the case of JonBenet Ramsey, that some of the things that were said in the ransom note were parts of movies.
and they say, like, a lot of the stuff in the ransom note is from the 1972 movie Dirty Harry. So I guess they would, like, and then that documentary, they show excerpts of, like, the script of that movie, and there is similar things like she dies, like, written over and over and over again, like, very similar to the letter. So then it kind of makes you think, it's like, is all of this just like some coded thing? Like, is it supposed to, like, mean something that only someone, like, you know what I mean? Like, is it coded somehow? Because I can't think of any reason why someone would write all those details out that are unnecessary, unless you were trying to send a message of some sort. Like, you know what I mean?
They already said that she was going to be beheaded if you did this, and she was going to die if you did this. Like, why say it over and over again? They're thinking, like, you know, if someone's reading this note, you really just have to say it once to get the point across. Especially if it's someone's daughter, they're going to get the point. And
also, like, we talk about the fact that, like, what's the point of the ransom note? Like, she wasn't kidnapped. She was in the house the whole time. They murdered her in the house and left her in the basement. So what's the point of the ransom note? Was it just a distraction? Was it just so that people would be thinking it was something that it wasn't? Because, like, if she had actually been kidnapped and taken out of the house, then okay. But, like, why leave the note and then kill her and still leave the note?
Well, my initial thoughts were that that was going to be the plan, was to kidnap her, and maybe they hit her over the head and realized that she was dead or dying after they had written the note, and they're like, well, I'm just going to get out of here, rather than pack up all their notes and get out. I don't know. Like, if that actually is what happened, I feel like that they didn't mean for her to die, but she did, so they just left it. I don't know.
And I also, like, when, like, the amount of money was, like, wasn't it, like, the Christmas bonus that John had gotten? Or something similar to that.
Yeah, like,
so,
he had recently gotten, like, a bonus at work that was very close to that amount.
So why, like, that exact amount? Normally it's like, it's just so specific, the amount.
Yeah, it's not like it's $100,000 or like $200,000. It's $118,000.
Well, yeah, and they said if you're gonna bother going through with this, if you're a kidnapper, like, go big, right? Like, why not just like an even million or something? Like, why that amount?
Because they were wealthy. And so they think, like, 118, it doesn't really seem like a lot of money.
Yeah, but if you're asking for ransom and you're going to do this, why not ask for more?
Yeah, like, if money wasn't the motive, they were just doing the ransom, like, the money thing for, like, whatever, but maybe it was just a bigger thing and they didn't care about the money, so they're just, like, making a random amount. But how would someone know that exact amount was his bonus? Like, it has to be someone who knew him, or someone who was, like, what are the chances, the coincidence, that they pick a random number that just happens to be the same amount as his bonus? To me, that seems like a very odd coincidence of all the millions of numbers in the world, that it would, like, be almost exactly. Yeah,
it's definitely a coincidence, or it was just stuck in someone's head while they were writing it. Like, they already knew that number. It's weird. I think another thing to point out about the ransom note was during that documentary, they had, like, statement experts and, like, linguistic experts there that were, like, analyzing it, and they found out that it was probably, like, an adult woman that had written the note, just by, like, the language and how clearly it was written in some of the words. So I think that's interesting, that it was probably a woman that had written the note.
And they also came to the conclusion that it was very likely staged, like, it was as an attempt to cover up something. And then they say, like, even the language, like, a small foreign faction, like, normally you would want to be a little bit more, like, to say, like, we are a large terrorist group, or, like, whatever. Like, it's very, like, authoritative, like, large group thing versus small foreign faction. And then after they mention the foreign faction, most of the majority of the spelling mistakes that are in the note come in that same exact paragraph where they mention the foreign thing. So, like, the person who's writing it might think, like, oh, if I say I'm a like a foreigner, and then I'm going to make all these like spelling mistakes. But then they mention like words like countermeasures, like that's spelled totally correctly, which like if your English isn't your first language, that's not a word you would ever use, I don't think. Like countermeasure, like
I've never used that in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, like no one who doesn't, like, I feel like if English isn't for your first language, that's not going to be your go-to word. And also spell it correctly, but you don't spell business correctly. Like they put an extra S in business. They spelled foreign. I'm pretty sure they spelled foreign incorrectly too. So it's like it was like obvious that they were trying to make it seem like it was some foreigner who was writing it.
But then they forgot about it as they went on because no other words were spelled wrong.
Yeah. It's pretty clear that it is like a cover-up for something, but it doesn't really answer like who is the one doing the cover-up. Like, I don't know. Jennifer, did you have something to say?
Yeah, it's very odd that they spelled all these common words wrong, like business, and then they chose to include the accent on apaches. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Like things like that, they get perfectly right, but then like a super common word, like business, that they don't. Like,
yeah,
they
that's such a
wrong.
weird, like detail that you wouldn't think they would know to do.
Yeah, and like I'm pretty sure like attaché, like I looked it up, it's like a briefcase. It's like it's like similar to a briefcase. It's like a different. So they thought, oh, maybe I'm going to use this word to make it seem like I'm using like the European, or like if someone's French or something. You know what I mean? Like a word that's not like common. Like I feel like like someone, I don't know, American would say like briefcase. Like I don't think attaché is like a typical word that someone would know for, I don't know. So I think it's like kind of clear that they're trying to cover up for like something, and they're not actually someone who's speaks a foreign language, to me.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it is like a ruse to throw people off, and it was unsuccessful. Another weird thing I think is well, they don't really go into this into like any detail in any of the documentaries I watched, but I'm just like, why don't they do like a hand sample analysis and like see whose writing it is? And like I've seen some sources come out and say that they matched it to Patsy's writing. So that I don't know how official that is, because it really isn't in any of these documentaries, but it is, thrown out there here and there. So that's interesting if it was her writing. And if they could just be like, well, it was your writing. Like, I don't know why it took so long, or why it was never fully out there. This like sample of writing.
Yeah, well, like they provided handwriting samples to the police like shortly after, but then nothing ever came out like from the police saying that it did match, like directly from them. So you'd think like if it did match that closely, that they would have caught that right away, would they not? But obviously if she wrote it with like her left hand or something, or her other hand, then it wouldn't exactly match. Then if she gives them like a handwritten one with her like dominant hand.
Oh yeah, and actually in like the Dr. Phil interview with Burke, like years later, he asked Burke about that, and he said that he didn't think it was his mother's, because he said his mom was always like super, like always like, make sure you write really neatly and take your time to have good writing. And he was like, that note was way too messy to be my mom's. So, I mean, but if she was trying to cover it up, she wouldn't have this perfect writing.
Yeah, like she's not gonna like make it like exactly like her cursive writing or whatever the fuck. Like obviously it's gonna try to make it look different.
And I was gonna say that like they did think it was like a mother who wrote it, because just the way some of the things were said, like listen carefully, or like other things in the letter that were like kind of like what a mother would say. I can't really think.
Well, there was one that said like when you get home. They said that the word home is very like maternal of a word versus like when you get to your house. But then I was thinking, because they were saying that, and I was thinking, yeah, but like when you get home is less words than when you get back to your house. Like maybe they were just trying to cut off time. It's already taken so long to write it. Maybe they might as well just like try to make a shortcut when they can. I don't know. Like to me, that wouldn't have jumped out to me, but also the people in the documentary are like professional like analysts of handwriting and language, so I can't say like, oh, it's not weird.
Well, yeah, a lot of things they said when they were looking at that letter I felt were kind of a stretch. I'd be like, oh, I never would have thought that, but then again, I'm not the professional, so I guess it makes more sense to them.
And one of them did say that like they felt that it was very much like a sales job, like the note. It was like they were trying to sell it, and like trying to sell with just all like I don't want to say hyperbole in it. It's like she will be beheaded, like all of this extra stuff that was totally unnecessary. But I just find it's like, when you think of the fact that it was written in the home and the practice notes, like to me, I just can't think of any, like obviously you hear some stories of like some stupid people who like commit like blunders that make it like really obvious who it was, but like I can't think of any person that's going to go in there so disorganized that they're going to like not have an actual letter written out. If they know they're going to be writing a letter, they're not going to have it written out in advance, or at least know what they want to say. Like, why do they have to take 3 drafts before they get it the way they want it? Like,
yeah, especially a letter that long. If you want to make a point and have a huge long letter, like you would have that ready, I feel. And if not, like you'd write a shorter letter when you're actually at the scene.
Yeah, like I just think like 20, because like you said in the documentary, they timed it out at like 21 minutes or slightly over 21 minutes of what it was. But that was when they like knew exactly what it was. They were just copying it. But like, even if it was bare minimum 20 minutes plus the practice ones, like say it's like a half an hour, like that's so much time. Like it's not a lot of time, but it's also so much time, like extra time. That's so unnecessary. If you're worried about like getting the fuck out of there before someone wakes up or something, I don't know. I could just think of somebody being so brazen that they would actually do that.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense logically.
So like that type of stuff makes me think like if the family was involved somehow, like that's the one thing that the main thing that makes me think like this has to be. And then also being for the person to be so unorganized too, where it's like they're going to completely abort the plan that they had originally and like leave the note there. Like to me, it's just, I don't know. They say in the documentary too that like the note is a red herring. That doesn't really mean anything. And obviously, and in the interview I watched with the detective Linda Arndt from 99, she also said that because she was there with the family in those early morning hours. And she said, because in the letter it says between 8 and 10 a.m. they're going to get a call from the people. She said that 10 a.m. came and went and no one mentioned anything about not getting a call, which you'd think, you know, she's like, nobody mentioned, she's like, I don't remember hearing anyone mention like, oh, it's past 10 and they never called. Like it seemed as almost if like they weren't expecting the call anyway.
Yeah, you'd think they'd be waiting by the phone, like waiting for these people to get a hold of them. Like I would be anyway, if I thought my kid was actually kidnapped. And
like, I also think in the letter, it's very clear that it says if you go to the police or if you notify anyone, your daughter will die. The first thing she does is notify the police. The second thing she does is notify all of her friends to come over. Like, to me, it's like exactly going against everything in the letter.
Yeah, don't have a crowd at your house that's super obvious. Like, yeah. I guess that she wants people there for support for sure, but yeah, it just too much.
Yeah, support is one thing, but also, I mean, it is kind of on the police department too, in a way. It's like, how would they let that many people be in the house at that time? Like, wouldn't they like cordon it off with like caution tape? Like, get out. Like, why do you have to be in the house? Like, I don't understand what like detective is going to let like a dozen people just be like in the house, walking all over everything, touching everything. Like, to me, that's bizarre.
Yeah, even when they first thought it was just a kidnapping, and they're like, well, we need to be searching outside the house. Like, we're just like gathering our thoughts here, I guess, talking. But you'd think like there'd still be evidence everywhere. So why is everybody here?
So I want to go, the next thing that like we'll talk about is the 911 call, which obviously we've probably all heard like so many times. That's like the one thing. Every documentary you watch about this case, they're going to probably play that 911 call. I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, to me, when I first heard it initially, when I hear it, it's like, it sounds very legitimate and very normal, like that somebody would be having those reactions. So then when you watch the documentaries, or some of them, when they talk about, because in that documentary, the case of JonBenet Ramsey, like they do interview the 911 dispatcher who talked to her. And she's the one saying that she said she felt something was very off from the very beginning of the call. And she notes all the things that she thought were weird. But like, and obviously I wasn't the one that she was talking to, so I can't say, but nothing in that 911 call initially stood out to me as weird. I don't know about you guys. Like, just, and it's hard to like think of it objectively without hearing all the other stuff that people have said about it after. But I'm just thinking, like, if I listen to that call just as what it is, it sounds legitimate to me. Like, she's obviously very frantic, which you would expect someone to be.
Yeah, when I first listened to it, that's what I thought too. Like, this woman just like realized her daughter's missing, and like she really sounds frantic. But like AJ said, like after you read or watch documentaries and you read things, it kind of changes your mind. But that was my first initial thought when I first saw it, was like she sounded like a very worried mother.
And she said she thought it sounded rehearsed, which, like, I mean, I don't get that at all. Even now, looking back, like listening to that first part of the tape and stuff, it's like it doesn't sound rehearsed. It does sound someone frantic and panicked, even to me still.
Like, I don't know what part of that sounded rehearsed at all. What's rehearsed? She's not answering the questions that she's being asked. She's not saying anything. Like,
I don't think any of it sounded rehearsed. It just was odd to me at the very end of the call that she didn't stay on the line until the police got there. Usually that's something you would do if you were in a situation like that, but maybe she wasn't thinking at the moment. She just was like hanging up the phone and had to get back to her family.
Then the 911 dispatcher also says that she thought she could hear a shift because obviously she stayed on the line, even though Patsy thought that the call was hung up. When she stays on the line, that's when you can hear the extra voices in the background. That she said it sounds like there was two or three different voices that are in the call. And then she said that's when she heard like a shift in Patsy's voice, like the panicked, frantic one, then suddenly changed to like a more calmer one, like after she thought the phone was hung up. But I listened to it and I didn't get that at all. I don't know. It's hard to say when you're not the one who was actually on the line, and I'm sure she would be a better person to talk to about that than like any of our opinions. But like to me, just as a spectator, it's kind of weird. Like I feel like a lot of the things she was saying were just kind of like hearing about how suspicious the family was. It kind of like changed her memory of it to make it more suspicious than it maybe actually was.
Yeah, that's possible. And I do agree with her that it's kind of weird that she would hang up in what seemed like the middle of the call, because as they pointed out in the documentary, like while you're on the line with 911, that's kind of like your hope, like your lifeline. And like the 911 operator never like confirmed the address. She never said, okay, I have somebody on the way, like stay calm. She never said any of that before she even hung up. Like, you know what I mean? Like Patsy wouldn't have that cue to be like, yeah, they're on their way, they're coming. She just kind of hung up anyway. So of course, me saying this now, I would stay on the line the whole time until the cops got there. But I don't know what I would do in that situation, I guess.
And she said she can hear 3 different voices. And I know the documentary that we all watched, the one I keep mentioning, the case of JonBenet Ramsey, they do kind of like they do like audio reconfiguration or like audio enhancement of like those background voices that you can hear. And they think that they can hear adult man, so presumably John Ramsey, and they also think they can hear Patsy saying, well, help me Jesus, what she says, help me Jesus like twice, and then they can hear like another voice that sounds like a male voice but like not an adult, so obviously like a child saying, what did you find? And that's also a point of contention because the Ramseys have said from the beginning, they said that Burke was sleeping the entire time until like hours after the police got there. So like this 911 call, if it is his voice in the background, well then he obviously wasn't asleep for those hours. He was awake during the 911 call, which is, and like in any event, like why, if that was his voice, why would you lie about it? Like why would you say he was sleeping if he wasn't? Yeah,
in that documentary they also said that John Ramsey said, we're not speaking to you. And like they said it was kind of like a stern voice, like talking to a child, like they were angry at him or, you know, just kind of like trying to tell him that, you know, you're not involved in this or we're not talking to you, whatever. So it makes everyone think that they were having this conversation after they thought that she had hung up, that they were like talking, they were mad at Burke and he was like, well, what did you find? And like it's this whole cover up that, you know, maybe they're hiding something because Burke did something.
What got me was that nobody ever questioned the 911 dispatcher. Like, not like when I was watching the documentary, the case of JonBenet Ramsey, like they interviewed her and that was the first time that anybody had asked her questions about the 911 call.
Yeah, like she said she wasn't interviewed for the grand jury, like that whole thing. No one ever asked for her testimony or anything, which is crazy.
That's bizarre to me because normally you'd want to talk to somebody who was like right there at the moment of this when this whole investigation started. Like you think you would want to talk to that person on the phone with her. So to me that just seems really odd that they never even questioned her or even like asked her like what she thought.
And didn't she say she was under a gag order initially until like the trial process was over with that grand jury thing? So
yeah,
like that seems weird to me. Like it's not like an information. I feel like why would you put her under a gag order unless you felt that the information that she had would be something that would be detrimental? I mean, obviously it didn't matter because they still voted to indict without that testimony, but still. But like, what do you guys think of like if you guys listen to that 911 call just like up front, like without all the other like opinions after the fact? Like if you say you were the 911 operator, like, I don't know. I think that's a very legitimate call to me. Sounds like a legitimate call. Unless she's a very good actress, and maybe that's the case. I don't know.
Yeah, I thought when I first listened to it at the very beginning, before like I knew any of the other stuff, like I thought it was just a legit 911 call. Like most of the 911 calls that we've heard in the cases that we've done, like I feel like it was just like a legit 911 call. I mean, that's how I would sound maybe if I was like woke up and my daughter wasn't there. Like, I didn't find anything wrong with it.
Yeah, it definitely sounded legit to me, but then I'm thinking, well, even if she did know that JonBenet was dead and they were covering something up, she could still be really frantic about that. But then I'm thinking, well, if she sat there and wrote that note, she would have time to kind of calm down maybe a little bit. So I don't know. Either way, I don't know. It does sound legit to me, but 911 operator did say that she was like frantic and then all of a sudden just kind of turned it off and stopped being frantic when she thought she had hung up is kind of a good point. Right? I mean, just because you're not talking 911 operator doesn't mean you're not going to be so flippant, right?
Yeah, but when they kind of like enhance the audio, she's saying, help me, Jesus. Like, and it sounds like in a similar tone. So to me, it doesn't sound like she calmed down at all. I don't know. Like, I don't feel like that's something you would say if you're calm again.
I guess maybe, yeah. And it wasn't as loud because she probably thought she hung up and then was moved away from the phone, so she was farther away.
And also, I do want to mention, I did read a Rolling Stone article about that documentary, and it was a bit critical of the documentary in some parts, and it said like the fact that like they're on the screen telling you what they think they hear, and then they play it and they put subtitles under it. It's like gonna trick your mind into thinking that you're hearing it as well. So it might not even be like what it actually is, but when you're seeing the subtitles under it, you might like think you hear it if that's not even actually what it is. So it could be completely wrong, and none of that stuff is actually said.
That's true. I found it hard to hear what they were saying. I'm like, I don't hear any of that. All I hear is like clicking and like gargling. I'm like, I don't understand how I'm not sitting there with like professional headphones on either listening, but I'm I'm not getting that at all.
Yeah, like, and even if you play devil's advocate and you say, okay, that is exactly what was said, and they're like masters at uncovering what was actually said, like someone saying we're not speaking to you, like what does that mean? Like, I don't find that weird. I don't know.
Well, who's he talking to if he's not talking to Burke, right? Like, who are they talking to?
Yeah, well, it had to be Burke, right?
Yeah, so that's sketchy there, because if they say he was asleep the whole time, didn't know anything about it, then that's like a lie right there. If they're all innocent, why? So...
Yeah, that's true. But it could be kind of one of those things where it's like maybe if you're like you're kind of working off adrenaline, then you're so frantic, and then when you go back to think of the events, you might not remember the exact events. Like you think you don't remember seeing Burke in those hours because you were so not focused on that. Like you're not thinking of like, you're probably going to think back like a week after when you're interviewed or something. You're not going to be like remembering where was Burke every minute of that time frame. So they might think like, oh, I don't remember really seeing him or interacting with him, so he must have been asleep. You know what I mean? Like they were just kind of surmising maybe, and then they were actually wrong because it wasn't what they remembered. Like I'm just trying to play devil's advocate, but
I guess that's true because like this enhancement of the audio didn't come out until like years later, so it's not like somebody went up to them and was like, no, we heard Burke's voice, and then that would have re-jogged their memory or something. So I guess that does make sense.
But I mean, I also do feel like it's kind of weird for a child to sleep when there's that many people in the house coming and going and police officers, and he's going to sleep because he said that he was awoken hours later, like once the police were already there. But like, why wouldn't he wake up earlier? But they do interview him, like when the psychologists are interviewing him, he says like, well, I typically sleep very deeply and I don't really hear much of anything. But was that like a line that he was told to say? Potentially, allegedly, I don't know. Yeah, everything is alleged here, obviously, because we don't know actually what happened, and we can't confirm obviously anything, but we're just saying our opinions and our thoughts based on the information that's out there, just so you know.
Also, like all the suspicion around Burke, I mean, it feels like a lot for a 9-year-old to kind of get this whole story straight in his head and never slip up. Like he does stay consistent with his story while he's that young and up until now. Like he never slips, which I feel is like it's like a lot to ask for a 9-year-old. If his parents are like coaxing him and coaching him on what to say, and he doesn't slip up this whole time, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's true. Did anyone have anything about the 911 call specifically? No. Okay, so I also want to talk about like the actual discovery of the body, because they do talk about that in the documentary too, and like the tampering of evidence when the body gets moved multiple times. They say in that documentary that, like you said, Katie, before, some of the stuff that they kind of mentioned, it seems like a little bit of a stretch. But they're saying that like he opened the door and the light was off, and he knew immediately before the light was even turned on that it was JonBenet. He's like, oh, she's here. But then he turned the light on and saw her. And they're like, well, how would he know that was? They're like, oh, it just looks like a blob of something on the floor, like in the dark. You can't tell. Because in the documentary, they like recreate the whole entire house, like to almost exactly like what it was really like. So they kind of walk through the crime scene in the house as if it were the real thing. And I don't know, that's one point that they bring up. And they also mention that it's very common in like cases where the person who did it is there to like like stage the finding of the body where other people will witness it so that they can like be witness to someone and the shock and horror when they find it. And that might be why when like he was told to go do a search of the house, he went right for the basement, made sure like his friend was with him so that there could be like some witness to him seeing it.
I just find it odd that when they said we're gonna search the house from top to bottom, that he like darted for the basement door. Oh shit, they're gonna look. We have to look in the basement and they find her. Like he wanted to be sure that he found her. That's what's suspicious to me. Like he just
wanted to make sure he
like a shot in hell. Like it's like a shot in hell. He went to that door.
Yeah.
Like he obviously knew she was there.
Yeah, she should have said. She said, "I said top to bottom, not bottom to top." He's going to the bottom first, and then making his way up. But maybe he's like he wanted to be the one to find it so that he could make sure that he picked her up, so that the crime scene was tampered with. So then, like, if anything were to come back against them, they could say, "Oh, well, it wasn't like actually reliable evidence because it was like all a tampered crime scene." So he wanted to make sure that like he was the first one to like get there. Because I think if like the detective had found it, they would have been like, no one's going to come in this room. We're going to leave it as is. And then there might have been a lot of evidence that would have been there that maybe got, contaminated with the moving of the body.
But why take the duct tape off her mouth though? That's what I don't understand. Like to have his fingerprints.
Did he take the duct tape off her mouth? Was that a...
That's what they said in the duct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he did. I even like if he did that, even though he didn't know beforehand that she was there, I think that would kind of be someone's first thing. Like, oh, like she could still be alive. Like I have to help her breathe. Like get this off of her. Like you'd want to get that stuff away from your daughter, right? Like get this. Her hands are tied. Like get that off of her. Get the duct tape off of her. And I think that'd be my initial reaction too. Also, I'm thinking like when he went right straight for the basement, it's not like he picked a random room and found her. Like I was looking at like the blueprints of the house that they have online. It's like there's like the stairs that are to the north, and then he goes right to like the southeast corner. So it's kind of like he was starting at like the southeast corner of the house, and he was gonna like work his way over. So it wasn't like it was like the middle he started. He's kind of started at one end of the house, which kind of makes sense if you were gonna search, right? That's maybe stretching it, but it's kind of just to be devil's advocate there.
And the autopsy, when they did the autopsy, the official cause of death was said to be asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. So there was like the blow to the head, and there was kind of a little bit of debate between like whether the blow to the head was actually what killed her or if it was the strangulation after. And then I think in that documentary they do mention that the blow to the head probably would have been enough to kill her, so that the strangulation was either like a staging again, or it was like they just wanted to make sure because they didn't know or something. And the garrote that was found was actually a homemade one from one of Patsy's paintbrushes. Like the bottom third of the paintbrush was the tool that was used to make it, and then they found like another piece of the paintbrush in like a bathtub that was like filled with art supplies, and then they never found the third part of the broken paintbrush anywhere in the house or anything. Like the fact that they never found that third piece is like that. Is that like something to show that maybe it was an outside person who took that piece with them? That's why it wouldn't be there. Versus if it was someone in the house who made it right then and there, like all the pieces should be still in the house somewhere, right?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting in that documentary they did say that the blow to the head was probably first, and it didn't kill her, but she was basically like brain dead, and she would still have a pulse even if like her brain wasn't alive. So they could have felt her pulse, or she could have still been breathing even though she like would have been a vegetable. And then they thought maybe she would come back to life, so that's why they strangled her. So it was kind of like she got hit first and then they strangled her just to make sure that she wasn't gonna come back, is what that documentary is saying anyway. So they're saying both of them would have been deadly on their own and that they were put together. But
there was a big emphasis in the documentary about possibly the tool that was used to strike her on the head. Being like the flashlight, because there is a flashlight that's in like the crime scene videos that's on the counter there, and the documentary they do test like the exact replica of the flashlight and they like use a mannequin to hit over the head with the flashlight, and it makes like an indent very similar to the actual indent that was found on her head. So it's like they're trying to come up with the theory that like that was the tool that was used, but there was no fingerprints found on the flashlight or the batteries inside the flashlight, so it was almost like it was wiped clean, which was also another thing saying like if that wasn't the thing that was used, then why would it have been wiped clean, and why would like that flashlight be the thing that was used? Like was that an unintentional hit, like they just kind of like in a fit of anger, like heat of the moment? hit her with the flashlight. And
yeah, it makes it more suspicious that there's not even like a family member's fingerprints on there, like somebody used it, but there's like it's completely wiped clean because somebody did that on purpose, right? So, and even the batteries, I can't get over like how somebody even opened it up, wiped even the inside down. Like that's somebody was thinking for sure. And also I think it's interesting to note that's why there was like no blood anywhere, because they hit her on the head and it kind of cracked her skull and she would have had like internal brain bleeding, but like it didn't break the skin, so there was not blood everywhere. So that's why like they might not have known how serious the injury was to her head, and that maybe they strangled her because of that as well.
Yeah, and the flashlight that they were given as a Christmas gift, supposedly, they didn't claim it themselves, and nobody else claimed it as well, which I found was very odd.
yeah, like the police said it wasn't theirs, and the family said that it didn't belong to them either. But the documentary did say, yeah, that it was a Christmas gift that was given to them earlier, so it was them. But then why would they say it wasn't theirs? Is that an attempt at a cover-up saying, oh, it doesn't belong to us, so if they did find anything on it? And it was honestly, and like Katie was saying before, the fact that it was wiped clean is super sketch. Like, it had to have been wiped down for a certain purpose. Like, if it's just a household flashlight, there's going to be fingerprints on it, and there's going to be fingerprints on the batteries at the very least, unless you're intentionally going in and like wiping them down after the fact.
That could kind of back up like the family theory that it wasn't them. Like this flashlight could have been given as a gift and they stashed it away in like their junk drawer or something, and then I don't know, the killer came in and was like rooting through their shit and like found it or something, so they didn't even remember that it was there. I don't know, that just could be.
Yeah, but like again, it goes back to the what kind of disorganized killer is going to go without a weapon already? They're going to like spend the time to write that ransom note, and then they're going to spend time trying to find something. Like, get your shit together.
They probably didn't intend to use it as a murder weapon. I would think maybe like they didn't want to turn on all the lights in the house, so maybe they like were specifically looking for a flashlight or something, or someone knew that it was there, and and they just happened to find a flashlight, and then they happened to hit her with it. Maybe.
But then like that's true. I guess that makes sense. But then why wouldn't there be fingerprints on it of that person, unless they were wearing gloves? But if they were,
yeah, well, why wouldn't there be fingerprints of like somebody in the house that put it in that drawer, right? Like person that gave it to them, or
that's
something,
true.
right? Like,
that's what I was gonna say. Because even if that person who did it was wearing gloves, there's still gonna be fingerprints on it from before.
Yeah,
like,
it's sketch that there's no fingerprints. It'd be less sketch if there was like Patsy's fingerprints. I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. It's hers.
Or if it was them, or if somehow the family was involved, why would she wipe the flashlight clean, but then leave all the fingerprints on the notepad and all of that stuff?
Yeah.
Like, because for the same reasoning, like if it's inside the house, it would make sense to have her fingerprints on it. So why would she feel the need to wipe it off? Or would anyone feel the need to wipe it off? And even if it had like Burke's fingerprints on it, it's still like in the house, so it shouldn't matter whose fingerprints are on, as long as it's someone from inside the house.
Yeah, it'd make more sense to have one of them have their fingerprints on it. That's why it's so weird.
Didn't they say when the police showed up or whatever, people were like doing the dishes and cleaning the house while the investigation was going on? Like, who does that? Like, who's coming into your house? Like, I mean, I guess to console you because you're frantically looking for your child, but like, who comes in and then cleans your house while there's an investigation going on in your house? Like, get the fuck out.
I don't know. Was that in the documentary? I don't remember hearing that, but maybe.
They were saying that they were doing the dishes. They were like helping clean up and stuff. Like, but why? Like,
I don't remember that either. But yeah, it's kind of like a thing where like people will bring food over to you because like you don't have to like cook, and people will like help you clean so you don't have to worry about cleaning. That kind of thing, maybe trying to be helpful.
Yeah, I don't exactly remember that one from the CBS documentary, but I saw a like ABC News clip, and they did explain that they were doing dishes, Windexing windows, all this kind of stuff, which is so weird because like that would tamper with the evidence so much. And then the fact that John Ramsey intentionally put a blanket over his daughter's body, like that obviously is going to tamper with the evidence, as well as putting it on a carpet that everybody's been walking across the whole time. Like it's huge red flags there.
Like it's crazy to me that like that happened. Like obviously the fact that people are cleaning the house is crazy, but what's even more crazy is that like the police allowed that to happen. Like, who is the person who somebody needs to go in there and be like, get the fuck out of this house, like it's a crime scene, like haul ass, like get out. We need to like clear it, we need to maintain, because like everyone's fingerprints are going to be all up in there now, so any chance of getting any like accurate evidence or DNA is going to be complete, and especially on the body itself. Like he's touching her, he's bringing her upstairs, he's like, and then the other detective moves her to another location. Like the investigation was screwed from the beginning.
Yeah, the police handled the situation like horribly the whole time. Like they should have done a way better job at it.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where it's like we see time and time again, like police incompetence, or like you hear after the fact, like, oh, this could have been solved if like this hadn't been tampered with, or like inconclusive testing because of like possibly tampered evidence. It's like people need to get their shit together and then like actually conduct an investigation legitimately.
Yeah, well, you talk about how like the police were kind of told to treat them as victims and not as suspects because they were this wealthy, like influential family that lived there. Probably helped a lot that they were white as well. Like, so they were just like this family that, oh, you know, don't really touch them. That I think played a big role in it too. Like the police, I remember they were saying like the police had to ask the Ramsey family for permission to come in and search certain things. Like they couldn't just go in and do it. They had to be like, oh, can we come in? Which I think is normal. Like the police kind of had to ask permission if you don't have a warrant, but the Ramseys would be like, no. And then so they would have to leave. So it was like that kind of thing where it was like untouchable almost.
That's true. And the fact that they were being like, you know, not as super cooperative as you would expect. Like I feel like we say also time and time again, like, you are under so much scrutiny in that moment too. Like no matter what you do, it's wrong. If you're not cooperative enough, it's wrong. If you're too cooperative, it's wrong. They'll find something. If you do a polygraph test, oh, you shouldn't do it because it's non-conclusive. If you don't do it, oh, you have something to hide. Like I feel like no matter what you do, you're kind of screwed. So you kind of have to just like, it's inevitable that the family is going to be looked at as suspects, but like knowing that like every move you make is going to be kind of criticized either way. So I don't think there's any like right way to act in that situation, because there's going to be someone who's going to be like, well, that's suspicious. But like, no, sometimes people just do weird things that they can't explain. And it's not like because they're guilty of anything. It's just because they're going through like a trauma and they're just reacting. Maybe not in like a way that someone else would.
Yeah, also another weird thing was how they were saying that even before John found JonBenet's body, he had like disappeared for like an hour and a half. Like he left the scene. They didn't even know where he went. And so they thought that was kind of weird. Like, why is he leaving? When you think about it, like, you know, maybe he was just like, I don't want to be sitting here while my daughter's out there missing. Like, maybe they don't ever say what he did. Like, nobody ever knew. Like, it's not like he was like knocking on the neighbors' doors, like, or anything. Nobody ever said anything like that. But it kind of makes sense if everyone's sitting around when your daughter's missing, that he'd be like, I'm going to go out and actually try and do something.
Yeah. Like maybe he went to the bank to try to get the money or something. I don't know. But like, wouldn't there be a record of that, or like the bank? I don't know.
I also find it weird that like, didn't they say like when the daughter went missing or whatever, and they were interviewing him, they were like planning a trip out of town.
He was like arranging for like a flight out of to go to some other state, which is weird.
Which I found that was weird too, like trying to maybe get up and like leave type situation.
And I believe that was before the body was even found. So at that point, it's a missing child. His daughter's missing, but they're going to plan a trip out of town. Like, wouldn't you want to be there to like make sure that you're like involved in the investigation? You're helping with the search. Like, would you plan to like just peace out like right away? It's weird to me.
Yeah, that's super suspicious. I don't have an explanation for that one.
But again, it could be another thing of like, no matter what you do, it's wrong. Like maybe it's a totally innocent explanation. And like it is, but it is weird. Like, I don't know what, I can only speak for myself. Like if someone I loved was missing, I'm not going to like, oh, I'm going to plan a trip to another state and like, you know, go there for a while. It's like, no, I'm going to be like there, like, you know, interviewing people myself, like something, you know, like trying to get to the bottom of it or doing something. Like, how is going away out to another state going to be helpful to anyone? Also, another part of the autopsy. So I mentioned it before when I was like doing the summary of the case, but they found like these two marks on her lower, I think it was the side of her lower left side. These like two marks that it kind of was speculated that it could have been something like a stun gun that was used to subdue her. But in the documentary that we've been referencing a lot, they do like a test of it. They do a stun gun test on someone, and like it kind of has a very opposite effect of what they're kind of saying, like, oh, they're using a stun gun to subdue her, but like it kind of gives you the opposite. It's like adrenaline rush, and it's like, and at least initially it's not gonna knock you out, or I guess is what I got, the conclusion that I got from that testing that they did. Especially if you're a 6-year-old child, it's probably gonna have a way heavier impact than like the 40-year-old man that they did it on in the documentary. If you're 6-year-old, it's gonna be way more powerful. So I mean, maybe it would knock you out, but for him, he was saying like, no, it gives me adrenaline, like I wanted to get away from it. It didn't make me like pass out.
I feel like it would definitely make you scream regardless. Like, how painful that would have been. Like, she wouldn't have been silent. Unless her mouth was covered prior, maybe. But you feel like there would have been some sort of sound coming out of her.
But, like, don't you subdue her? Like, how do you get the duct tape on her mouth without her screaming before it? Or, like, wouldn't you subdue her so that you can do all of that without a fight?
I guess. I was just thinking, like, if she was just in bed and they, like, put the stun gun to her without anything else, she would have screamed. But I guess you could put, like, your hand over her mouth, do that, and then put the duct tape on after she was, like, subdued.
Yeah, that's true. So this mysterious killer came into the house with no previous ransom note already planned, no murder weapon planned, but he had a stun gun. That's what he came in with. He made sure he had that stun gun on him, so or her, whoever it was. So just kind of weird. But that was one theory. But then there was another theory, like the two marks were very similar. Like in the house when they were doing the crime scene videos and stuff, there's like, I guess like a train track or like this toy train that belonged to Burke Ramsey, and like the track had like these two protrusions outside of it that would like connect it to the other track, and they say that the exact distance of those two marks would have been very similar to like the marks that were found on her body. So it's like said that maybe that was somehow used in some way. I don't really know what they were getting at. If like that was, I think they say at one point that like if she was hit over the head with the flashlight and knocked out, then whoever did it like used that to like poke at her to see if she was awake or something. Yeah,
they also pointed out that it would have had to have been done post-mortem because they could tell that there was no blood flow at the time. So they think it happened after she died, and then whoever did it was like, yeah, using it to poke her to see if they could get a reaction out of her, seeing if she was dead.
But they used the train track versus anything else? Like, why would that be the one thing that this person would use?
Yeah, they said there was
touch her.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Especially if you think about if you think like if maybe it was a kid, like if it was actually Burke that did it or something. Like, would you want to touch your sister if you thought they were dead? Like, I don't want to touch a dead body, even now, right? So I feel like using a poking device is like super legit.
Yeah, so I guess that was the working theory that like if he knocked her over the head with the flashlight, presumably, and then she was dead, and then he used that to poke at her to see if she was dead, and then when she was, then. But then it makes sense as so then that does lead towards more of it being like a child or like Burke Ramsey specifically versus like an intruder, because if it was a stun gun, why would you tase her after she's dead? If it was done post-mortem, like you wouldn't have a need to tase her.
Yeah, and that documentary said like that, I don't know why they thought they knew like what model they would have used, but the taser that they had, and I'm sure like there are different types of tasers, they said that they like the prongs didn't match up, like the holes and where the ends of the taser like didn't match, so it couldn't have been a taser. And I was like, well, there's probably different sizes of tasers. So that was kind of like, I don't know, maybe weak on their part. But also I was watching, like, there's a Dr. Oz episode, and I know Dr. Oz isn't, like, the most reputable, but he was talking to people that knew what they were talking about. So in this Dr. Oz episode, yeah, so it was actually a Dr. Oz True Crime, and it aired in February of 2021. He was talking to Lou Smith's daughter, and Lou Smith was, like, an agent that had passed away, but he did a lot of work on this case, and it was kind of his theory that it was an intruder and it was a stun gun. So that's kind of where all that came from, was from him. So his daughter was kind of like following up on some of the research after he died, and they were saying that if you zoom in closer on those marks on her body, that they don't match with the train track, because the train track ends were like circular and the marks on JonBenet were more rectangular, which actually did match up with a stun gun that they had, that they were comparing it to. It was the same shape and distance apart. So they're saying like this model of stun gun actually did match up better than the train tracks they were saying before. So that's just another theory, another angle.
Yeah, so obviously no one knows what those two marks are from, but I've never really heard anything else other than either a taser or that train track. Like, those are the only two things I've ever heard or ever seen. So is there possibly like another explanation? Like, who knows? There could be a million things that have shaped like that or something. But I want to talk about also going back to like the autopsy and like the body. A big chunk of the documentary is about like DNA that was found on JonBenet's underwear that like didn't belong to anyone in the Ramsey family, because they did DNA testing, and it belonged to like an unknown male, which kind of bolsters the intruder theory that it was someone outside of the family. And then when they did testing, or like in the documentary, they did testing, like they brought a brand new pack of underwear and like they did testing on it, and they did find traces of like DNA on that, which like grossed me out. Like I was cringing the entire time that they were doing that, because I guess wash it when you open it. It's like gross, but yeah. So they were just trying to say like it is possible that there could be like the DNA from like the manufacturer. So that could be why. And obviously if they ran like the DNA testing that they did find on JonBenet's underwear, like if they tested it and it didn't belong, they didn't find a match of a person, then obviously it wasn't someone who was already in the system. And because the theory was for a long time, because she was in the pageant world, that it was like possibly some sex offender who was like, like in the audience of her pageants, or was like infatuated with her, who like broke into the house and did that. So if it was like a sex offender, and they also, there was apparently a bunch of sex offenders living in the area around their house that actually, but obviously it wasn't someone who was a registered sex offender, because their DNA would have been in the system. So it was somebody who had never committed an act like that before, or at least never gotten caught before, because the DNA was never actually confirmed or matched a person, as far as I know. They said it was a male, but that it didn't match any person specifically. So what did you guys think of like that part?
Weird that there's like DNA on like unopened package of underwear. Like, gross. Like, maybe we should be washing our undergarments from here on out when we buy them. I don't know. I just find like, you think even her, like, not even her DNA was on it?
I'm pretty sure her DNA was.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say like that'd be really odd.
But they found the DNA of an unknown person, which is like what they used to kind of say, oh, it was an intruder, because if it was someone in the family, like it possibly...
Yeah, they actually use that, saying that it wasn't part of the family, to like exonerate the family and say, oh, it's not their DNA, so it wasn't them that did it. And then this documentary pointed out, well, I mean, it could have been just from the underwear, whoever packaged it could have been their DNA. So, yeah, and it is super gross that that's a thing. And like, thinking about this documentary, I'm like, I wonder how many times they tested underwear to see, like, was that their first try and they happened to find DNA, or did they like try before that? Like, was this the 100th pair? Like, I'd like to see like the percentage of like, you know what I mean? Like how many times they tested to see if there was DNA, and there was, because I think that's important. But they just kind of presented it as, oh, here's a random package and there happens to be random DNA. Yeah,
that's true. But I guess, I mean, the point is that it still is possible that it could happen. Like, it would happen on that one piece. It might not be super common, or it might be super rare, but they were able to do it when they, even if it was like the 100th package, like it still could have been. Like, obviously it's possible.
Yeah, I guess that was their point that they were trying to make.
But yeah, they do present it as like, oh, this is our very first try. We're going to open this random pack that we just bought, and then, oh, look at that. So I feel like it's all about the editing too, like how they edit it together and what they don't show versus what they show.
Yeah.
They definitely shouldn't have ruled the Ramseys out just based on that. But anyway, that's just my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's so many more things that like do point to that it's possibly someone in the family for them to like rule them out based on that one thing. But I mean, DNA evidence is pretty credible. Like, obviously it's a huge thing. But if it does have this other explanation, like, that would make me question. And was that something that was presented at the grand jury trial? Like, was that something, and they still voted to indict even if that was presented? So obviously they didn't feel confident in that either, unless that came out after the fact. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I also found the DNA of an unknown male underneath JonBenet's fingertips or fingernails as well, which I guess could be related to that. That could be unrelated, or could be related to the underwear as well.
Oh, that's true. Did they say that in the CBS document? I don't remember them saying that, but I guess if they...
I don't think they said in that documentary, but I definitely remember hearing it somewhere else, which makes me think, like, yeah, where did that come from, and whose is that?
Oh, yeah, that is... Oh, my thoughts are changing. No. Yeah, I feel like that does sound vaguely familiar, but yeah, who is that then? Like if it was someone that she was trying to fight off and like dug her nails into like someone's skin or something.
Well, I was also trying to do some research on like how long DNA can stay underneath your fingernails for, but I couldn't really find a precise answer from Google. But again, it could have been something that happened a long time ago. It could have been like her trying to scratch off her defender. It's really hard to say at this point.
Yeah, that is true. That would be a good point, because if it can stay for a long period of time, like, but I mean, I'm assuming she's washing her hands semi-frequently, but she's a child, so I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say she's 6 years old. She probably doesn't wash her hands very often. Like it could have been from it could have been from like, you know, school. Maybe she was playing or fighting with the kid, or like part of the pageant. She was just like, I don't know. Wow, weird that it's a male, but yeah, it's interesting. It could have been from anywhere though.
Yeah, she's at pageants. Like, is she shaking people's hands? Like, is that I don't know what happens at pageants, but. Is that something they would do? Like, that's possible too, if she's, you know, interacting with a lot of people. That could be something too. But yeah, it is weird. I forgot about that piece of information, so that doesn't look good for. I mean, that kind of goes towards the imposter theory or intruder theory for sure.
Yeah, I didn't hear the fingernail thing, so that really intrigues me as well.
And that's the thing about this case too, is that there is so much on either side, or at least something on either side. Like, it's never definitive. Like, just when you think you have an answer, you might think what you have, but then there's this other thing that totally might make that other stuff invalid.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's like you could, like, if you just watch that one CBS documentary that we've been talking about this whole time, you'd be like, oh, like it definitely could have been the family, because they're very much focused on like, you know, that it was a family, so they're very one-sided, which I think most of these documentaries are, like trying to prove a point on one side or the other. So it's like, it's important to remember that you do have to like kind of take everything you hear with a grain of salt, because they're only representing that one side, trying to convince you, which is easy to do with this kind of case where there's like so much on each side.
Yeah, and I did make a note of that too, and I was like, it's very clear that CBS documentary was against the family. Like, very clear, just based on everything. Like, there's not one shred of anything that they present from the other side.
No, they ignore everything that could be against the family.
Yeah, which obviously,
that could be for the family.
Yeah, which I mean, obviously you would if you're trying to. Any documentary, I feel like, is going to be biased in some way. Like, it's probably very hard to find one that is like just presents every single fact. I mean, maybe there is, I don't know, but yeah, I could tell when I was watching that CBS one that it was very lopsided. But even the 2021 that came out actually just in January 2021, it was kind of similar to the CBS one. Maybe it was a little less noticeably biased, but it still was kind of like made me lean towards it was possibly someone in the family. Like, I didn't walk away from that one thinking like, oh, it's definitely up in the air. Like, I kind of was leaning towards one side. So the final sort of thing, I feel like the last thing in this part that we'll talk about is which we didn't really talk about yet, but is like the pineapple that actually ended up being, it's weird that like something so simple as pineapple is like such a big part of the case. But there was like a bowl of pineapple, like it was like milk, it was like pineapple with milk and a bowl and a spoon in it that was like in the crime. You can see it in the crime scene videos when they're doing that, which might seem super insignificant, but when they did the autopsy on JonBenet, there was like fragments of something that was like something like fruit, which could have been like pineapple that was in her stomach and hadn't fully digested, which suggested that she did eat it like relatively soon before she was killed. So there was like a possible theory that she had woken up in the middle of the night and ate some pineapple. Someone gave her pineapple, or that Burke was like down there eating some, and then she like stole a piece of it, and then he got super angry and like killed her in a fit of rage, which like seems to me like a stretch. But the fact that she had like that in her system, so obviously she ate pineapple like before, and I don't know if they said the exact like amount of time it was before, but like if she went to bed at like 9 when they got home, she was sleeping, and she was sleeping the whole time. If she had eaten it at dinner the night before, like I feel like maybe it would be fully digested before that. So like the fact that it wasn't was like it had to have been after that. Yeah,
and they had mentioned that like her dinner was already fully digested and gone, so that was like the only thing they could clearly see. So it was like definitely hours after her dinner had already been digested. So yeah.
Yeah, and there was when they ran fingerprints on the bowl and the spoon, it had Burke's fingerprints on the bowl.
It also had Patsy's fingerprints on the bowl.
Yes.
Which makes sense, because she probably is the one that washed it and put it away. And then maybe Burke took it out of the cupboard.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, like people focus on that, and I'm just like, well, of course, the mother's probably, the one that put the dishes away, and Spoon probably put the spoon away as well.
Yeah. Like, obviously, yeah, because you wash it, but then you touch it again to put it away. So, obviously, whoever put it away, you don't think fucking Burke's gonna put it away. So, like, obviously, it was her.
Yeah, and they were also talking about how the spoon was, like, big, like, too big for the bowl. And Patsy was like, oh, I would never have given Burke that big of a spoon because it just looks weird. Like, it doesn't fit. Like, so she was bigger, like, I didn't prepare that dish. Like, I wouldn't have done that. So it's just kind of been like, yeah, it must have been Burke that just grabbed a spoon for himself. Which is weird, but that's what she said.
But I just have a hard time believing that, like, Burke would kill her over stealing a piece of his pineapple. Like, to me, that's, like, such a stretch. It's like, oh, we have this theory, we need to, like, make it fit.
In this documentary that we keep referencing from, they were talking to our family friend, and this woman was saying that, like, Burke had, like, fits of rage here and there. Like, he would get angry, like, just out of nowhere. And, like, things would set him off, like, easily. Like, they said one time that, like, he had swung a golf club and, like, hit JonBenet, like, below the eye with the golf ball or something like that. Or club, I mean. So, like,
yeah,
he did.
Yeah.
So he did have, like, times where he would just, like, get angry out of nowhere. So to me, it's believable that if she, like, you know how a sibling would take, like, a food from somebody, because that's commonly what they do. If you're eating something, the other sibling is going to come over and take something from you, and he could have just got mad and picked up that flashlight and smacked him over the head.
Well, then they said, but the bowl and the spoon didn't have JonBenet's DNA on it, so they were thinking, like, if she just, like, reached into the bowl with her hands to get the pineapple, she didn't use the spoon, or she didn't touch the bowl in any way.
Which is a common thing a child her age would probably do. Like, to be honest, my daughter takes my food off my plate all the time. She doesn't take the whole plate. She just takes the food off of it. Mm-hmm. So it's a common thing that kids do randomly.
Yeah. Or if someone fed her the pineapple.
Yeah, that's true,
and
too.
She didn't have to touch the bowl. But then it's like, who would have done that? Like, that's also weird. It's an intruder. Oh, come have some pineapple. Let's spend some more time in this house. Let's spend as much time in this house as possible. Like, to me, that's so weird. But then I don't think they ever said if she was given. I don't think she would have been given any, like, snack before she went to bed, because she was sleeping when they got home, right? So that's not a possibility either. So it had to be after they got home, after she was sleeping.
Yeah, I think they presented it as, like, she had woken up randomly and went downstairs and, like, saw Burke eating it, so she grabbed some from him.
There's, like, no timeline that really, like, shows of, like, what time Burke was still up or that she came downstairs. Like, they don't really say, like, this is, like, 2 o'clock in the morning? Like, how late in the night is this?
And apparently he sleeps very heavily and doesn't hear anything, but yet he gets up in the middle of the night. Like, I feel like someone who's a deep sleeper would just sleep right through the night. Why would you be up in the middle of the night?
But I don't think he wasn't asleep when they got home, though. He stayed
but
up.
Like 2 in the morning, he would be probably.
Yeah.
Also, he had just gotten a, like, Nintendo for Christmas, and he was probably super pumped about it. Maybe he was, like, excited and wanted to, like, sneak down and play some Nintendo. Or, like, maybe he was already awake and was hungry or something. Like, he might not even went to sleep that night, or he might have just woken up randomly and went downstairs. So
yeah, that's true. Because, like, kids are excited at Christmas and stuff. So it was the night after Christmas, but, like, still he wants to play with the toys he got. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so that whole pineapple thing, and, like, the possible explanations for it, like, kind of leads into, or is one of the big reasons, or a big piece of evidence or speculation that people are using to say that possibly Burke himself did it. But we'll get more into that specific theory in the second part. So we're going to break down, like, the 3 main theories in this case, and we'll talk about, like, the things that help that case or against that case, and we'll kind of break it down that way in the second part. So we will be back for part 2. It's released the same day, so you don't have to wait a week for it. It will be out. Scroll up on your podcast app and see it. But yes, follow us on Instagram at Crime Family Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at CrimeFamilyPod1, and we do have an email, crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com. Send us case suggestions for our second season. If you want to hear a case, maybe we'll talk about it. And also in the second part here, we are going to get some viewer suggestions, because we did get some theories or some comments submitted from some of our listeners. So we are going to go over those in the second part as well. So more to talk about. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.